going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a lovely day wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. Let me adjust the mic here a little bit more. There we go. Today we're going to be jumping into some Warhammer Fantasy with Pancreas and the Orc. We're going to be checking out every Warhammer Fantasy faction explained. Links will be down below in the description to Pancreas and the Orc's channel and to this original video of his without my commentary and reaction. So please do me a favor, if you enjoy this video as we go through it, be sure to go over to his channel, give it a like, check out the content on his channel. He does a lot of stuff for Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, and some other universes. So check out his content. If you enjoy it, hit that sub button on his channel. Show the man some love. If you want to take your support from the next level, you know, check out his Patreon and all that kind of stuff and see what all the special stuff he has to offer. But yeah, I guess let's just jump into the video here. If you like the video with my commentary and reaction, you know, consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me and the channel grow. Lets the YouTube algorithm gods know that you like this kind of content and you want to see some more. If you want to take support from my channel to the next level, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. You can come join us when I do my reactions live, as I'm doing right now with my YouTube members. We'd love to have you guys come in and join our discussions that we have before, during, and after the videos. And you can get, you know, prior to any kind of reaction requests, you might have, you know, Discord access to sub channels, etc. So take a look at all that stuff if that would interest you. But for now, like I said, let's jump into this video. Again, every Warhammer Fantasy faction explained by Pancreas, no work. Monitor on. Let's go.
Controversial statement. I like when people get into Warhammer. It's always a joy to have more people to play with and interact with in the hobby space. It's a new chance for me to try and convert someone, anyone, into accepting that the Eldar are actually really cool and interesting, and please, just for 5 minutes, stop saying elf bad. But speaking of elves, every time there's a wave of people that first learn about Warhammer, there's always one thing in common with them. None of them realize there's more to Warhammer than Space Marines, Tyranids, and spikier Space Marines. There's a whole other pair of settings that also exist, and they just fly right under the radar half the time. And this sucks, because the best Warhammer setting is right there. Yeah, GW ended it, but then it came back. And if you don't want to, you don't even have to collect thousands of dollars of minis to play with this one. Kind of. Warhammer Fantasy has been around longer than even 40k. It's had its ups, it's had its downs, it got blown up for a little bit, but thanks to Total War, Vermintide, and the constant nagging of the community, you can once again play in the old world. With elves, dwarfs, and humans as standard, but also some more out-there races, such as magical frogs, rats, and Walmart shoppers.
I like
and not
the
enough
magical
people
frogs.
know about them. Not nearly enough, and not nearly enough people learn that this setting is even a thing. So I'm gonna be doing my part today. Today I'm gonna learn you all about every faction in Warhammer Fantasy. Some of them had extensive army lists and plot relevance, some of them languished when unupdated army books for years on end, and some of them until recently were relegated to about 3 pages of background lore. Doesn't matter, we're doing it all. If you can conceivably consider it an actual faction, they'll be here. Think of it as a companion to this video. That one was me trying to overview the setting as a whole, and this one is about the groups of people in the setting. So let's dive into a world of fantasy and see what all that nonsense about them having the Warhammer is all about. But you're about to start listening to me list off all kinds of factions. And do you know what you could be listening to me with? Raycon and their Everyday Earbuds.
All right, we're going to skip this here sponsor, but if you want to check out the sponsorship in his, you know, video on his channel, do so. Like I said, I encourage you, show the man some support.
Began.
Orcs
That's orc
and
spelled
goblins.
with a C, by the way, not a K. But across the board, the Greenskins of Warhammer Fantasy aren't that different from the ones in 40k, which is why we're starting with them. They like to fight, they're mushroom people, they're green. If you took an orc from 40k and put them in a greenskin tribe in
they don't say DACA. I think that's really the main difference.
Fantasy, he probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Might wonder why no one has a decent shooter hanging around, but he'd be content with his life regardless. He might even be happier, because these orcs have characters like Grimgor instead of Ghazghkull.
And I don't think they paint themselves red in fantasy either.
There are no thinking and tactics for Grimgor, only beating everything near him to death. The Greenskins used to have some pretty different lore, being closer to D&D than anything else. They had half-orcs, and they didn't reproduce with mushroom spores. Then as time went on, that was moved away from, and eventually we came to where we are now in the old world. That being that the orcs hopped a ride with the old ones' ships when they came to the Warhammer Fantasy world. More on them later. From there, they naturally began spreading out across the entire world. The Old Ones and their servants did their best to get rid of the orcs, as they did all other races they weren't quite fond of, but you can't get rid of the orcs once they're on a planet. It's just not possible. So nowadays, if you wander around a given area long enough, chances are you'll find some greenskins kicking about, making things worse for whoever lives there. The orcs themselves are one of the biggest similarities between the two settings. The biggest guy is in charge of the tribe, and if you get a real big boss, he might be in charge of multiple tribes. And when you get a really big boss, you can get a whole proper WoW going. When this happens, you usually get a whole lot of dead humans and dwarfs. Painting something red still makes it go faster, painting it blue makes it luckier, and can block arrows from killing the blue-painted orc. And they still love looting. Not nearly as much as in 40k, but you can always find an orc in a tribe wearing dwarf plate armor, or wielding a human greatsword he grabbed off a corpse. They do have some more savage brethren who judge other orcs for using things like basic tools, or digging a pit to shit in rather than just letting it drop where you stand, but aside from being a bit more magical, those orcs aren't really all that different. Where you get the biggest change, though, is with the goblins. See, in 40k, grots are an entire species of plot irrelevance to the orcs. You'll get one like Makari once in a blue moon who are allowed to be in the shadow of the spotlight of a far more famous orc, but the goblins in fantasy are an actual threat all by themselves.
Right.
Sure, they're still cowardly and will refuse a stand-up fight unless they outnumber the enemy 40-1. Sure, they're still kicked around by the orcs and are used to do all the manual construction stuff. And sure, they're still slightly smarter than the orcs, so anything resembling any actual construction or research is done by them. But every now and then, not often, but every now and then, you get a goblin who's a cut above the rest. And when that happens, everyone's in trouble. The goblins are cunning little buggers. They know in a straight-up fight they're gonna lose,
no,
so
like
they'll wait till the biggest orc around is sleeping and slit his throat, or poison his food, or convince him there's something shiny in a nearby cave filled with hungry trolls. And sometimes, if they're really insane, they'll overdose on literally magic mushrooms, and when they come back to reality, they've slaughtered every orc in charge in a manic frenzy. Now instead of a big green moron who just about knows which way is forward leading the army, you have someone like Skarsnik leading an orc army. A green little Sun Tzu who's gonna run circles around you and your entire military. Or you can get one that pretty much just lucks into the position, like Grom the Paunch, hallowed be his girth. Instead of being clever, he just got incredibly lucky and was forced to eat troll meat. Instead of exploding, which is normally what happens when you do that, he just kept growing alongside it. 3 things happened. 1, he got so incredibly fat he'd beat rival orcs by sitting on them. 2, he became a legend among goblins everywhere, the alpha male fantasy they all wish they could be. And 3, he nearly ended the world by sailing from the equivalent of the Middle East or Africa to the middle of the Atlantic and destabilizing the High Elves. If you like grots and wish they could, do anything important ever, maybe take a look at the goblins. Their history really isn't anything special though, mostly because they're greenskins and what you see is what you get. Usually, they beat each other up. Every now and again, one of them beats up enough orcs that he convinces them all to go beat someone else up instead. This continues until that war boss is killed, and then the orcs disband and go back to beating each other up again. Some evil dwarfs like to use them as slaves, and when they tried to make bigger, stronger, and smarter orcs to use as slaves, they immediately learned why that was a bad idea when the orcs revolted. If you like being mean and green, you'll like the orcs. And one crucial thing I nearly forgot, they love to dance. Wurzag may be the prophet of the orc gods first, but he's a hell of a dancer second. Now let's get out of the realm of similarities and into some things fantasy really does different. When the old ones showed up, the planet they arrived on was ideal for creating the ultimate weapon to fight.
Yeah, I think in like 40k, the lizard race are like the old ones, and then they just kind of, had that whole war in heaven thing, and they got wiped out. They're like an actual, like, still around kind of race in Warhammer Fantasy.
Chaos. Of course, they still had to create it. So to do that, they started by moving the planet closer to the sun to warm it up, which pissed off a lot of things on it, like the dragons. Speaking of, there were a lot of races on the planet that wouldn't really like to share the room with the old ones' creations. So to help them with the legwork, as well as get rid of all those fellas, the old ones created the Lizardmen. They also created most of the other playable races. The only good gobos one of this exists. Stated, assume all these factions started out as the test tube babies of the old ones in one way or another. The Lizardmen were not this ultimate weapon against chaos, although
yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. Yeah, there are hints that the old ones are the same with the Slan. Yeah.
They were still pretty good at fighting. You know how I said the orcs resisted extermination by the old ones? That was just them who managed it. Everyone else fell under a tide of angry lizards, dinosaurs, or angry lizards riding dinosaurs, with that small little bit of genociding out of the way.
This is one of my favorite factions in the Total War games. I like the Lizardmen. I just like their like overwhelming power, when you have Triceratopses and Carnifexes and all that kind of stuff. Proxigors and all those. I don't know. I just love the power of the Lizardmen and just dominating enemies with them.
The old ones set about making the world fit their needs. The Lizardmen were their chief assistants, and to be the best secretaries they could possibly be, the old ones made them in several different flavors. All of them with a dash of Mesoamerican cultures thrown in, because if you have the option to have Aztec lizard riding dinosaurs, you have no good reason not to take it. Yeah. First you have the Slan. The Slan are the best wizards in all the world. They may be big fat toad people, but the first generation ones were the ones who changed the entire planet's orbit, moving around where it needed to be in space. Moving down the generational line, they did get weaker, but that's highly relative. Second generation Slan could only cause entire mountain ranges to suddenly appear at the drop of a hat. These were the Lizardmen who directly worked with the old ones and delivered their messages and will to the rest of them. Next you have the Saurus. Stupid people might think that since the Lizardmen are a Bronze Age civilization at best, they're not much of a threat. Then an 8-foot-tall monster from the Cretaceous period clubs you to death with an obsidian axe, and you find out just how the Saurus were able to depopulate an entire planet. These were the generals of the Lizardmen armies. They were bred for war and only war. They're pretty straightforward, and all their characters have the same background of bred to kick ass, but this is Warhammer. That's a feature, not a bug, and they break it down to its simplest possible form. Next are the Skinks. They're little chibi gecko axolotl things that do to the day-to-day management of Lizardmen society. You need a building planned out or to do basic diplomacy.
Isn't there a hero, one of these guys, who was like so Giga Chad that he got like stuck in like the equivalent of the warp, the like chaos territories, and was like hunting down chaos demons for like the equivalent of thousands of years before he escaped back into the material plane or something like that? I think that's one of the heroes in one of the Total War games for the Lizardmen. Something like that. He would just like run around, do guerrilla warfare tactics, assassinating demons, and they just couldn't catch him. Like, pretty Giga Chad.
You send the Skinks. They're also skirmishers. When the trees start speaking great planese, it's the Skinks doing it. They've even got their own god all to themselves, Sotek. It was a bit of a controversy when he came around at first, but the rest of the Lizardmen seemed content enough to let him be worshipped. Finally, we have the Croxigors. They're alligator men. They build the buildings and gator death roll all over enemy armies. That's it, but that's all they need to do. When Chaos first came and the Old Ones fled, the Lizardmen had to figure out how to not only survive, but continue the Old Ones' work in their absence, which they sort of have been pulling off a little bit. They held off the invasion at the cost of almost all the first Slan and most of their spawning pools, turning them into a very numerically disadvantaged race. Not that this stops them from still sometimes rampaging across the world, but they are largely held up in the jungles of Lustria nowadays, also known as South America, because Warhammer Fantasy is just Earth if someone with really shaky hands drew a map of it. They're isolationists, the Slan will spend centuries at a time meditating on the few plaques the Old Ones have left, and they really hate when tourists come to Lustria because it's usually to steal those plaques. They're all gold, you see, because gold doesn't tarnish or rust. Convenient for writing things down in a jungle, less convenient when all the warm bloods come to steal the shiny stuff. If you see a Lizardman army, you're either screwed because the Great Plan dictates your death, or screwed because you're somewhere they don't think you should be. Very simple faction, but again, that's a positive. Sometimes being dino-brained is the way to go. Also known as the Imperium, but not as awful. These guys are the default protagonist faction. They're the strongest nation of men in the world.
Overall, this is probably my favorite faction in the Total War games. I just feel like they're not great at any one particular thing, but they're good at everything. And if you utilize their units properly, it's pretty hard to beat. Plus, I really like the Hippogriff Knights. Hippogriff Cavalry. I like good, strong cavalry. Hippogriff Cavalry is like the best cavalry in the game. They're just good against everything, and they just destroy everything.
And that's no meaningless boast here, because there's actual competition they have in that department, unlike the Imperium. They formed about 2,500 years prior to the setting's modern day, when a pretty cool dude named Sigmar was born. Sigmar had a dream,
aka the Emperor,
the scattered tribes of barbarian into one unified nation of mankind, to drive back the darkness and bring peace to the land. He did this chiefly by beating up everyone who disagreed with him, but in fairness, most of them deserved it. If this sounds familiar, let me just remind you that this guy was here first. Plus, Sigmar realized that outright killing everyone just because they disagree with you is perhaps a bad idea that will lead to problems later down the line, so he settled for only beating them up. Sigmar didn't just beat up people, though. He also beat up a lot of orcs. Like, a whole lot of orcs. So many orcs that the dwarfs swore eternal friendship with mankind, because if Sigmar is so kick-ass, surely the rest of humanity can't be that bad either. He united most of the tribes of man in the area, and you better believe we'll come back to the most later, and formed the Empire of Man. 50 years later, he just up and left. A little bit after that, he became a god, and the Empire soon worshipped Sigmar as the chief god of their pantheon. The Empire is pretty unique as far as fantasy factions go. Usually a fantasy setting will reach the medieval era, and then very
I'm not a fan of Bretonnia, that's just me personally.
The next trillion years of its history. The Empire isn't like that. When Sigmar was doing his thing, it was barely the Iron Age. The dwarves giving them steel weapons every now and then was considered the height of technological advancement. Nowadays, 2,500 years later, the Empire has tanks. Good tanks? Yeah. Look, for a Renaissance age civilization, tanks are pretty damn impressive no matter how good they actually are. They have factories, mechanical horses, and countless other things that make you wonder if the book you're reading was put in the fantasy section.
They have a broad range of wizards.
They also have wizards who scam people out of $50 for the thrill of it, politicians who constantly need to be wrangled by the one competent guy in the entire government, and enough floppy hats to arm the entire Holy Roman Empire with. They're still normal people, though. The three things that make the Empire great aren't genetically modified super soldiers, or lost technological secrets from a golden age, or even the direct intervention of their gods. It's faith, steel, and gunpowder. A whole lot of each. Give a man a halberd, a cause to fight for, and his friends by his side, and it turns out you can push back even the most determined of evil murder Vikings time and time again. Most Warhammer fantasy books follow the Imperial characters around, and you get a good feel for just how fleshed out this land is through them. You've got the Heartlands, sure, places like Altdorf where it's interconnected with the wider world, magic runs through the very city through its colleges of magic, and elves and dwarfs can be seen regularly. Then you have backwater shitholes like Ostermark, where the people are outnumbered by everything nearby that wants to kill them, and guns are still a scary black magic invention for a good half the population. Or Averland, whose most noticeable trait is that they hunt halflings for sport there. There's halflings in the Empire, by the way. They can vote on the next emperor because they baked a previous one a really good meal. They also had a civil war over pie. Don't be a halfling in Averland. You're gonna decorate someone's mantelpiece sooner or later. Of course, this is still Warhammer, fantasy or not. Sure, I said it's not as awful as the Imperium, but it still has witch hunters who will burn you alive for being a wizard, or being a mutant, or just for being a bit too ugly, because that's also a sign of chaos mutation. And it's still a Renaissance age civilization. For 90% of people, this
That's like the one thing where I think fantasy went like a little like crazy with, right? Like I feel maybe I'm wrong, but like the witch hunters are kind of the fantasy equivalent of the inquisitors, and it feels like the witch hunters in fantasy are a little more like zealous than some of the inquisitors in the 40k universe are. Not that the inquisitors don't, you know, throw around exterminatus whenever they want to, kind of thing, you know what I'm saying? But I don't know, it just feels like witch hunters a little more ready to wipe things out compared to most inquisitors in 40k.
This means it's a medieval civilization, but you might see more pretty statues and paintings than your ancestors did. You're still probably going to die of the water making you poop too much. They're bordered
which again isn't a ton. I haven't really gotten super deep into a lot of the books in 40k, you know, compared to what I've heard of in fantasy.
By the undead, beastmen are everywhere once you leave the city limits, and worst of all, they have people who have sex with horses for neighbors. The Empire is constantly on the defense, from orcs, from chaos, from beastmen, which are a different kind of chaos, and really anyone else who's feeling a bit bored that day. But the average citizen of the Empire will do their part to keep the hordes at bay, and at the end of the day, they did this for 2,500 years until the authors decided reality itself had to go, which is a pretty good track record. They're a human, relatable nation, like if the Imperial Guard got to actually be the main characters of 40k instead of Space Marine 9001, model on sale now for $60. It's grounded, with people having normal struggles, but also fantastical, with wizards and monsters being everywhere. They do have one ultimate ace in the hole, though, the reigning emperor, Karl Franz. The best statesman in the old world, the guy who wields the Warhammer. You know the one, the actual real-life Warhammer logo. That's his, and he's very good at using it. He's the kind of politician who could convince you into giving him everything you own and leave you thinking you got the better deal, but also the kind of person who wouldn't do that to you. He's got everyone's interest at heart, and overall, this guy's the best emperor in Warhammer. Not Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer in general. Kiss my ass, corpse worshippers, this one can walk, talk, and beat you to death in the name of the Empire. If you like relatable folk with a touch of the fantastic, Sigmar and his people have your back. But I did say most tribes are united by Sigmar. Unfortunately, a couple weren't able to be integrated for one reason or another. Let's talk about the one that I like first.
I like Kislev. Kislev's another good faction.
Eastern Europe thrown into a pot and mixed to boiling until it coagulated into one Slavic specialty stew. They live in a frozen hellhole, which is also their country's greatest defense. They wear thick fur pelts. They have winged hussars. They also squat.
I mean, they have cavalry that rides on the back of polar bears, brother. How can you not like that? That's badass. Okay, that's some badassery right there. Not to mention, like, half of their units, like they have rifle axes, okay?
In the middle of a battlefield, because such is the natural state of the Kislevite. And vodka. Even the dwarfs and their genetically ingrained alcoholism respect
the Ice Queen's pretty dope too.
Kislev's job in the setting is to face tank chaos invasions before they get to the Empire of Man, which they do pretty well. Half their cities are torn down in the process, but they're a hardy bunch. They walk into the winter snow, and when everyone occupying their land freezes to death, come back in and rebuild. Their religion is different from the Empires, and they view them as weak southerners, but the two nations are still staunch allies. Mostly because when the forces of actual hell are your neighbors, anyone else is going to be a good friend. They're led by the Tsar or Tsarina of Kislev, because GW was worried you wouldn't understand which region this place is based off of. Many times, and indeed the last one before the world blew up, this was an ice witch, a handy person to have running your country when a raging blizzard is considered a mild day. You still can't play as Kislev in the old world, thank you GW for that extreme blue balling, but they had some pretty heavy redesigns, and a lot of the marketing for the old world did at one point feature Kislev. Here's hoping GW...
I think Cathay, it's one of those two. That's another faction that's only available in the game. I think that's like a faction that's a myth in Warhammer Fantasy tabletop. Cathay. I don't think they actually exist as playable too, and they're just kind of like a mythological something that, you know, has come up in the books every now and then.
W realizes that winged hussars riding bears is something people are interested in. Shame that sentence needs to be said. I don't know why anyone would ever need to be told that.
Yeah.
These
I don't like
are those
Bretonnia
people
at
who
all.
have sex with horses. When Sigmar was uniting everyone, they refused to join him, because obviously they were too good to join him. Did they have some super special magical secret or a technology that could let them surpass?
I don't know what it is. Like, I like the whole, like, Arthurian lore and legend and stuff like that, but I could never get into the Bretonnia faction and the Total War games. It just, I don't know. Just couldn't do it.
Past the fledgling empire or some other race in the whole? No, but they copied the elves' homework and our French, so they decided they were too good to shack up with a future god and went it alone. Bretonnia looked at all the cool advancements the empire was making, how it was a dynamic nation in a genre that usually gets to the medieval era and then freezes like it's going into cryosleep, and said no. We will not be doing that. We will be staying as medieval land. It is mandated by the government that technology will not advance, that society will never have any major upheavals, and that everything is just perfect the way it is. It's like that old decree the Pope made that declared crossbows were a blasphemous weapon, taken to be an entire society's philosophy. Bretonnia is all about knights. Baby knights proving themselves, magical knights defending the realm, and
tons
saving
of cavalry.
damsels, knights leading the country.
Like, the only cool thing about Bretonnia is the Pegasus Knights. That's pretty dope. You know, bunch of flying knights. That's pretty sick. The Green Knight's pretty cool too. Other than that, I don't know. They just don't really do it for me.
Further the goals and interests of the rest of the knights. Imagine King Arthur. That's it. Just imagine King Arthur stretched out to be a whole faction. The in-universe justification is that they saw high elf cavalry and just ran with the concept. Out of universe, it's just King Arthur and every medieval stereotype thrown together. You could, admittedly, say the same thing about the Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, or Kislev in Eastern Europe, but those are eras and places fantasy writers don't usually copy wholesale, so they get a pass from me. Bretonnia is the land of almost every fantasy setting ever conceived since Lord of the Rings, and it shows. Unfortunately, they can afford to do all of this fantasy stasis, because an elf goddess is playing them like a fiddle. Their precious Lady of the Lake, also known as the Elf Goddess of Magic, chooses some super special knights to become Grail Knights. They sip from her chalice of bathwater, and when the now Grail Knight emerges, they're like supercharged D&D paladins. Bullets are an inconvenience, their armor is magically toughened, and their mounts never tire, so until the Empire invents the Gatling gun, they're able to keep being aggressive bathwater dickweeds. In older lore they were tolerable, but in modern lore someone must have felt they weren't angsty enough and made them nice and extra oppressive. The peasants are honored if the noble allows them to have 3 pennies a week instead of 2. Ladies who aren't magical are property because medieval times, and social mobility is a punchline. I hope you like medieval.
The Lady of the Lake or the Holy Grail or whatever actually is like an elf goddess. Yeah, that is kind of an interesting thing. I wonder what would happen if they realized that, you know, if it would make a difference or not.
Medicine. The Empire's medicine already isn't that great. Bretonnian medicine is the kind of thing that has a 300% fatality rate. And horses. Everyone has a horse. Even the lowliest peasants have a horse that more often than not eats and lives better than they do. I like horses, but I don't like them that much. If you've ever been to medieval times and made that your entire personality, Bretonnia is a good faction for you. Because God is real and hates me, they're also one of the starter factions of the old world, so getting into Warhammer Fantasy nowadays is pound for pound fairly easily done with Bretonnia. In all honesty, pick them if you like them. It is on some level cool, because for as much shit as I was giving them for being generic and bland knights, knights are cool. There's a reason every 5-year-old wants to be a knight and not a Landsknecht. I mean, for God's sakes, just trying to say that word is difficult.
Cathay.
The other army GW
I like
has
Cathay
refused
too.
to put onto the tabletop, despite already having a direct hand in reworking them for Total War. Did you know there's a fully fleshed out Cathayan army book for GW developed? You can't have it, because funds not allowed. This is a shame, because Cathay is awesome.
Sad.
Dragons are also awesome. Cathay agrees, because they're ruled by immortal dragons, who the Cathayans follow at every whim. Fantasy China is a...
That is the one thing that I like. Like, all of their heroes can turn into dragons and just destroy everything. Is very satisfying. Is very satisfying.
Magical place, and one of the few places in the entire planet that might not be a terrible one to live in. Every now and again, it does what actual China used to do and implodes, and sure, those ruling dragons get along like all siblings do, i.e. barely at all, but in day-to-day life, not a bad place. And it always comes back together after imploding, usually after Mommy and Daddy Dragon come back to kick everyone's heads in until they start behaving again. It is, like I said, just fantasy medieval China, but that is a compliment. You know those terracotta soldiers? What if they were animated by magic and also 100 feet tall?
Yeah.
Are you a 40k fan? Imagine if the Primarchs weren't utter morons and failures almost to a man. Because that's Cathay. Again, for reasons I will never understand, we don't have them yet in tabletop. But Total War does, and by God is it fun to play as Cathay.
I wonder if they will ever actually bring them to tabletop, right? I mean, I guess it would make sense if they would, right? With the fantasy having a resurgence. You know, but I guess it probably would come down to, I mean, obviously for Games Workshop, it's about selling things, right? So, like, do they think it would, like, interfere with stuff they have going on with Age of Sigmar and would take away from that, you know, kind of a situation, I guess? I think that's probably what it would come down to, right? For them and their decision-making is, like... Is it going to take away from something else they're trying to build up? You know, I mean, I feel like 40K on the tabletop side of things, they don't really have to worry about that. You know, like 40K is like their main thing for tabletop. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder if we will ever see Cathay as a tabletop faction, because they're one of my favorite ones in the Total War games. I would have to say probably like the Empire is probably my favorite. I like the High Elves. They're probably my second favorite. Especially just because they have, again, dragons, and dragons are sick. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what the general is, but there's a general that specializes in dragons. He's probably one of, if not like the best, like, hero in the game. And he rides a dragon, and you get, you know, better dragons with his faction. And then the High Elves are just, you know, really powerful with their spears and archery, and they have good cavalry too. So I like them. They're probably my second favorite faction. Then it's probably Kislev and Cathay, and they might be interchangeable with the third and fourth spot. And then probably the Tomb Kings are probably my fifth favorite. That's probably my top 5, like, favorite factions in the Total War games. So it would be interesting to see Cathay in a tabletop setting. I think they used to be in fantasy, but for some reason they didn't bring them back to the old world. If I remember correctly, they only brought like 6 factions. Yeah, they didn't bring back a lot of them when they redid the old world. And who knows, maybe they'll re-release them at some point in time. I thought Cathay was never a real tabletop faction, and they were only like something that was mentioned in the books. But they were, you know, again, like for Total War Warhammer 3, in order to help sell, you know, more copies of that, they were added to that as, you know, one of the selling point factions. This, you know, mythological faction that no one's ever seen or heard of is, you know, in the game.
The Silk Road was prosperous in real life, and it's prosperous in Warhammer, so if/when they finally come out, prepare to show the world why China was for a good 1,000 years the most prosperous country on the planet. It's even better here, because this Great Wall has magical dragon ladies guarding it. Oh, Cathay is also near the countries of Nippon, Ind, and Koresh. Nippon is Japan, Ind is India, and Koresh is Southeast Asia. I'm not giving them their own spots because no one cares about them, and I can't bring myself to either. That's it for the non-chaotic living humans, but that doesn't mean we're done talking about humans. The next few ones just don't have
vampires
or skin.
The vampire
These are the
counts.
bad guys when chaos is taking a break. Imagine Dracula, if you will. Now imagine Dracula if he had a 100,000 strong army of zombies, skeletons, lesser vampires, and pretty much anything else that you could find at a Spirit Halloween. The total history of the vampires stretches back thousands of years, but for the purposes of this video, we're only going to go back a few hundred. We go to a fella named Vlad von Karstein, because if you haven't caught on yet, this setting is allergic to subtlety. He showed up to the very on-the-nose Empire province of Sylvania, which was a horrible place to live. It was covered in swamps, the people were dumb and afraid of scary monsters, and because this setting is what it is, they weren't even wrong to be so. When a peasant in real life says the witch made their family ill with the plague, it's baseless superstition. When a peasant in Warhammer says that, there's a good chance they're right. When a Sylvanian peasant says that, they are right. Vlad shows up to this province, marries the daughter of the ruling noble to become its next ruler, and despite being a blood-sucking vampire, this place sucked so hard it was a marked improvement. Even better, him and his wife Isabella actually loved each other. They had vampire kids like Conrad von Karstein.
Yeah, imagine that. Imagine the vampires actually making things better. Which I think, right, like, vampires in the Total War setting, they aren't, like, completely evil, right? Like, they fight against chaos and whatnot. They're just undead humans, essentially. You know?
Karstein, who is insane and liked to twist the heads off of peasants, and
maybe I'm wrong
Karstein, who is the worst. Of course, this wouldn't be Warhammer if everyone was just nice and peaceful, so one day Vlad had a brilliant idea. What if he was the Emperor? He could live forever and usher in an eternal age of prosperity, mostly for vampires, but for some of the people too. So he tried to become the Emperor. At gunpoint. Zombie point more like, but 100,000 zombies is a lot more effective than most Renaissance
100,000 zombies, that's the point.
He failed, but the damage was done. Him, his wife, and their children spread vampirism across the Empire. Now Sylvania is barely even considered a part of it, and everyone does their best to ignore it. This is probably a bad move, because every few decades some vampire likes to try their hand at raising a massive undead army to take over the Empire with. They all fail, but they're very murderous. Them failing means the Empire's population only drops by 20% instead of 100%. Just watch the first episode of Castlevania if you somehow haven't for what it's like when the Midnight Aristocracy goes to war. There's a lot of vampires to choose from though to get your specific undead needs satisfied. The von Karsteins are the classic vampires who want to suck your blood and rule over the night. The Lamians are a vampire KGB with spy networks in pretty much every place on the planet. Except Lustria, probably. The lizards don't take kindly to that sort of thing. The Strigoi are what happens if your average Florida resident became a vampire, the Necrocs are evil wizards, and the Blood Dragons are a heavy metal album cover. If you thought it was kick-ass when Dracula sent the forces of hell to wreak havoc on the living, you'll love the vampire counts. But I did mention that some of the undead don't have skin, and vampires usually have that at least. For those fellas, we need to go further south.
There we go, my boys.
Ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt. You now understand the basics of the Tomb Kings. Once upon a time, thousands of years in the past, the lands of Nehekhara were prosperous. They had regular contact with their gods, magical constructs to defend themselves with, and when they had a good king like Setra, they would sometimes go on to conquer half the world. Then a fella named Nagash was born. He's awful. This man was a monster through and through. He's really smart, though. Smart enough to capture Dark Elves and force them to teach him dark magic, which usually humans can't do. Smart enough to invent necromancy with what he learned. Smart enough to overthrow his brother, the king, and take over most of the land with his undead forces. And he's also quite powerful with his magic. He was eventually overthrown and cast into the desert where he died, but he invented necromancy. That is a suggestion for him. Yeah. Such is his power. When he inevitably came back, he discovered someone had stolen his research notes and used them to make vampires. He made those vampires his generals, and no, they didn't have a choice in the matter, and then decided ruling just Nehekhara with undead wasn't enough. So he formed a plan to kill everyone in the region at once, resurrect every corpse on the planet, and take over the world with his World War Z undead army. part 1 of the plan went off without a hitch. It was only through the intervention of the Skaven, who I promise you will love, and the last living dude in the region, which kept most...
I don't know about the Skaven, man. I like the idea of the Skaven, right? And they're kind of like weird, you know, warp technology with rattling gunners and all the crazy stuff they have, but I don't know. I could never really get into them in the game.
Most of part 2 from happening. Then everyone in Nehekara promptly stood back up, realized their hearts were no longer beating but they were still standing, and things got messy. Imagine Game of Thrones before it became horrible, with all the political fighting over who gets to be king. Now imagine Game of Thrones if every single person who was ever the rightful king was now alive at the same time fighting over what was their throne. Not they believed it to be their throne, or they wanted it to be their throne, it was the throne they sat on once upon a time. And also they can respawn. And also, most common people were mindless undead skeletons who had the flesh flayed from their bones with the desert winds and could only follow basic orders, like kill that guy who thinks he's the real king. This does not a stable nation make. Luckily, the priest woke up that Cetra guy, who cockslapped everyone until they started behaving again. Now the Tomb Kings no longer have skin, have no clear path to achieve immortal bodies to feel with again that they so crave, and no longer have the backing of their very gods. Fortunately for them, death is more of a suggestion. They can still use magic, even if not quite as good as it was when the gods were helping, and they now have eternity to do whatever they want, as long as it doesn't involve some sort of physical sensation. Sometimes they still fight them.
I mean, that's like the saving grace is the one faction where you get nukes with the Skaven, right? Because, I mean, yeah, who doesn't like nuking things?
Amongst each other, sometimes they spend their newfound immortality pursuing whatever hobbies they want, and sometimes they sail all the way from Egypt to Sweden and burn half of it to the ground because someone stole their hat. And on the rarest of occasions, a tomb queen will tell a strapping young lad that if they still had functional genitals, she'd fuck him so hard the experience would kill him. They're very fun. They're true neutral to the core. Some of them want conquest, some of them just want to find new hobbies, some hate the living out of jealousy, some don't care either way as long as they serve, and some go out of their way to find human members to recruit for their court because it reminds them of what they've lost. If you can think of a motivation, there's a Tomb King that has it. It's a very simple thing to know if the Tomb Kings are for you or not. Do you like the Mummy? Do you like ancient Egypt? Have you ever wondered what it'd be like if the Sphinx came to life and started crushing people like Godzilla? Tomb Kings are perfect for you then. Yep. And hey, look at that. They're the other starter faction for the old world. Now you can get into fantasy proper without people like me dismissively calling you a horse molester. So now we can leave this region of the world and indeed humanity, and I have forgotten 4 human nations that deserve at least a little bit of credit. Shit. Tylea is Italy during medieval/Renaissance times, so it's thousands of city-states smushed into one country. It's right next to the Skaven capital. There are worse places to live. Estalia is Spain without the colonial empire. Both of these places say they're the first civilized nation in the old world, which the empire disputes. The border princes are the land of whatever the hell you want it to be. It is an excuse to make your own homebrew army, and they fight orcs more than anything. Most of the people there are either fleeing from the empire, leaving the empire in a futile attempt to make it big, and petty nobles. Araby is exactly what you think it is. Turn Aladdin into a war game faction, but only a background faction. And if you think that's me being dismissive of it, do please read about Sultan Jafar's military campaign against the old world. It's actually got advanced medicine, science, and magical practices and theories, but I can guarantee the only thing you're going to remember about this place is Sultan Jafar. We're going to start by clumping all the elves together, because their backstories are all very interconnected. Don't worry, they'll each get their own time to shine. Once upon a time, there were just elves. The first species created by the old ones to fight chaos, they were made to be elves. Arrogant, long-lived, and short of the Slan, they're the best wizards.
Another 40k kind of similarity, you know, old ones creating elves
around. Then chaos descended, the old ones pissed off, and the elves had no idea what the hell to do. Eventually, a cool elf named Kalidor made a magical vortex, the chief cool elf, Anarion, grabbed a cursed sword that killed a whole lot of demons, and then everything cooled down a bit. Anarion disappeared, but they elected a new king, so all was okay. His children with his first wife even showed back up to be a bloodline of legendary heroes, though they're also cursed because of that sword. Then Anarion's second wife told their son Malekith that he should be king, convinced him with her boobs because family trees can be shaped like Christmas wreaths, if you don't mind being a
yeah, that whole storyline is just weird. Where it's his mom, but also they're lovers, I guess. I don't know, that's a whole weird plot line they went down with these guys.
Freak, and a civil war broke out. Malekith walked into a sacred fire to prove his worth, whereupon their chief god lit him on fire. Him and his mother kept trying to take over the home continent of Ulthuan. They nearly unmade it when they realized they couldn't, and then the newly formed Dark Elves were forced off of it to go live in Canada. The High Elves, those who stayed behind, once again got to rebuild the shattered remnants of their home. At least they still had their firm friendship with the Dwarfs. That's a good thing. Oh,
yeah,
wait,
sure.
That got ruined too. But don't feel too bad. The High Elf King ruined that one for them himself by being the worst. That one wasn't an unfortunate tragedy. It was a self-imposed unfortunate tragedy. The Dwarfs and the High Elves fought Fantasy World War I, and it was pretty miserable for everyone involved. Picking a victor is sort of meaningless.
He's a cool character, and the Dark Elves as a faction I like too. I mean, yeah. He's one of the better heroes. I like heroes that are good at being a duelist, but still have magical capabilities, you know? So, he's a good one.
That's because both groups were pretty thoroughly wrecked by the event, and the High Elves had to return home when the Dark Elves began the first of many invasion attempts to retake Ulthuan. Some High Elves didn't go home and sheltered in a magical forest called Athel Loren instead. Now we have our third group of elves.
Now you got the Wood Elves.
The Wood Elves are the easiest of the subgroups to explain. They sit in their magical forest and are insane. Sometimes people walk into the magical forest. It's safe to assume that unless stated otherwise, they do not come back out of the magical forest. Sometimes even if you come out of the magical forest, you find that 1,000 years have passed since you entered, and every single one of those years catches up with you as you age to dust within minutes. Aside from that though, your first instinct might be that these are stupid, uninspired, lame D&D Wood Elves who love nature and harmony and trees. And in fairness, they do love all those things. It's just that these trees are 50 feet tall, mobile, have a craving for the suffering of mankind, and the Wood Elves will invite peasants to feasts to fatten them up for the forest spirits. They don't give a rat's ass about the outside world aside from how it might affect their perfect little lives inside the forest. There are a few scattered enclaves of them across the world that are a bit friendlier, but the general motivation of the Wood Elves is getting other people to get the hell off of their lawn. And when the lawn can come to life and devour you alive, it's a pretty easy task to do that. Pretty good idea to get off the lawn. They also gaslight the Bretonnians into thinking they're goddesses in an elf one, although as it turns out later on, the extent of the elven gaslighting goes even further beyond their understanding. They're led by the avatars of two of the elf gods, naturally the ones that are focused on nature, because Wood Elf. The king likes to rampage across Bretonnia every now and again for funsies, and the queen sometimes says don't do that, sometimes doesn't care, and sometimes encourages it when she's in a feisty mood. They're not my thing, truth be told, but I can respect the idea of wanting to be left alone for all eternity. So if you two cringe inside a little bit whenever you get a text message or a Discord DM, these guys might be for you. The High Elves are the ones that stayed on Ulthuan and remained much the same throughout. And like I said, the old ones sure as hell made them to be elves. Long-lived, magical, arrogant, and because they live for thousands of years, they're real good at what they do. Some of their swordsmen have been practicing for so long that they take into account the weight of their eyelashes when they swing. You're not beating that. And sure enough, the history of the High Elves is the history of them sailing out from their homeland to go stop most of the problems the world faces. They taught humanity how to use magic properly, they keep excess magic from saturating the world, and they have a habit of showing up just as they're needed to stop things from getting completely out of hand. There's a High Elf who destroyed orc warbands that have been rampaging since the dawn of time and was so good at it that he gave the entire elven race a reputation amongst the Greenskins for being good fighters. All of this because a fat goblin burned down his house. And of course, Teclis my beloved. Is there a 10,000 strong army of orcs, dark elves, or worse bearing down on you? Well, with a wave of his staff and a flick of his wrist, there is now a new crater. He's a real cool guy like that, and he's not even that arrogant. The flip side to balance this glazing session I've just done is that they do actually have weaknesses to go along with all that. They reproduce slowly, and in a wargame setting, that's the mark of death. Every death in battle is a hindrance, although at least compared to 40k, they aren't outright dying. They're on the watch list for being endangered rather than being endangered outright. And magic being so innate to them means that when something with it goes wrong, they feel it and are affected by it more acutely than most. Like when their magical queen is sad. Their entire homeland's climate is tied to her emotions, and like any living being that isn't a psychopath, she is sad when a great amount of her people die. So when Malekith decides today is as good a day as any to get 1 million people killed trying to retake his homeland again, it really sucks to live in the same country as her. They're also physically frail, which isn't the biggest weakness in the world, but you'll definitely notice it when an orc is bearing down on them. They've also got a bit of a species-wide depression thing going on too. When you live functionally forever, you get a long time to get a real feel for what the world is like. And as it turns out, this world kinda sucks. They just don't have time to recuperate from any of their constant losses. The world is in danger, the High Elves sail out to fix the issue, and then the world is immediately in danger again. Add on to that some more standard
Elven
weaknesses,
get a little old
like
after a
their
while.
old age, meaning they don't always adapt to new things well, and you've got a race that has a bit of a deadline attached to it. Mankind is inventing guns, tanks, and more, and the Elves think the bow and arrow remains the height of warfare. To their credit, though, they're damn good with that bow and arrow, especially when it's a magical lightsaber bow and arrow.
Their bow and arrows are probably still better than the majority of gunners the Empire has. You know what I'm saying? So.
And dragons. The High Elves are best friends of almost every dragon that isn't from Cathay. Dragons are scary in a fight, and let's be honest with ourselves.
They're dragons.
If a dragon declared your hometown to be the best thing ever and made sure to always visit and help out when it was in trouble, you'd have an ego the size of Mount Everest too.
I mean, yeah.
Overall, if you like elves, you'll like these guys. Even if you don't like elves or only associate Warhammer's elves with the Eldar, the High Elves' ability to actually put their money where their mouth is might win you over. And if nothing else, there's an elf character named Aletha Nar who skins Dark Elves alive because he just hates them that much, and is overall Michael Myers if he had pointy ears and special forces training. Hard to get more unelven than that guy. Speaking of ego, though,
the Dark Elves.
take the stereotypical elven arrogance, or if you're not a big fan of the race, elven racism. Now jack it up to the logical extreme endpoint of the concept so that they don't only think they're the best, they think of all other races as vermin that should either serve them as slaves, be hunted for sport, or outright eradicated. Welcome to Nagaroth, friends. It only goes downhill from there. Warhammer North America sucks. It's home to the Dark Elves after they got kicked out of their old home.
Florida's underwater here, so I don't have to deal with it. You know, I don't exist.
And the entire thing is either a frozen hellhole, a desert hellhole, or a frozen hellhole bordering actual hell. There's something called the Altar of Ultimate Darkness inside of this place. Do you think anyone that lives here is gonna be nice? Sure enough, the Dark Elves aren't nice. There used to be some human tribes that lived in Nagaroth, and then the Dark Elves killed or enslaved them all. They had cities built into mountains they used as ships to raid and enslave others, they kidnapped High Elf children to raise as Dark Elves, and the entire society looks like what would happen if every single Decepticon was Starscream. Murder and treachery are only illegal if you get caught, and if you're powerful enough, not even then. They're led by Malekith and his mother Marathi, the same two elves who formed the Dark Elves 10,000 years prior. Marathi's kind of just always awful, but sometimes if you squint real hard, Malekith can almost sort of a little bit resemble a noble elf hero he once was. Then he does things like instituting the elven god of murder as the head of the Dark Elf pantheon, uses demons as auxiliaries when he invades Ulthuan, and starts the Warhammer Fantasy Triangle slave trade. In spite of failing to retake Ulthuan every time he tries, he's a damn powerful wizard and warrior both. He's just Darth Vader, actually. He's even got the suit of armor that helps keep him alive because he was severely burned.
And to my understanding, I think he actually does have some kind of... There is some justification to his stance of thinking that he deserves to be the throne. You know, he deserves to have the throne of Ulthuan, right? Like, I forget exactly what it is in the lore, but something happened with the line of succession where he should have got it and then got cheated out of it, you know, at least from his point of view. So I don't know. But I think there is at least a little bit of like credibility or justification to his claim that he should be the Phoenix King. But then again, you know, look what he turned into, you know. But then again, even on top of that, you know, a lot of that is also from his mom being, you know, the great parent that she is.
And who can forget his mommy issues? Although I don't think Anakin ever piped his mother, so a little bit different there. There is no height of cruelty that Dark Elves don't aspire to. Acting nice gets you killed because it clearly means you're weak. Admitting you're a bit tired or injured gets you killed because if you were strong, you wouldn't be injured, so clearly you're weak and someone else more fitting should take your spot. They don't have as many dragon allies, and the ones they do are corrupted by dark magic, so they just grab whatever monstrosity they can find in the Midwest and put it in chains until it's time for battle. Much like their cousins in space, if you find you're about to be captured by them, it's probably best to just off yourself. They may not have quite as exotic measures of torturing you, but they make up for it with a real go-getter attitude in the field of human rights violations. There's a holiday called Blood Night. The cult of the god of murder goes around and kidnaps people to murder. They steal elven girls to be trained as witch elves like them, and they throw elven boys in a cauldron of boiling blood. If they survive, they get trained as an assassin. I don't think a concrete statistic has ever been given, but you can assume that not many people survive.
Sounds like a lovely
if you like
place
being
to visit
edgy, either
on the
ironically
holidays.
or because you think suffering is inherently deep, you'll like the Druki. I can already feel the viewer retention going down, though, from how long I've been talking about elves, so how about we move to their polar opposites? Elves are posh, regal, and always at least a little bit uptight.
I like the dwarves too.
Dwarfs are brash to the
They're
point
one of the better
and consider
factions.
sobriety a sin. While the Elves of Warhammer have a few things that make them stand
I like
out a bit from
artillery.
the standard elf template,
I like big
the Dwarfs
boomy
of
thing.
Warhammer could fit in just about any setting with minimal
And they have
issue.
gyrocopters,
they like
right?
drinking,
Like-
they like mining, they hate orcs, and getting them to complement non-dwarf craftsmanship is like pulling teeth from an orc. They hate magic both because it's weird elf nonsense and because when the old ones made the dwarves, they made them so opposed to magic their mere presence makes it not work properly. They love mining in mountains because that's just what dwarves love.
Just
They
what
do have
dwarves do,
three
yeah.
things that make them stand out, though. First is that it's pronounced dwarfs, not dwarves. Second is that these dwarfs are industrious little fellas. They've discovered oil and how to use it, and with it make helicopters, trains, and more. While humanity has galleons with cannons and the elves have either magical dragon ships or city-sized slave ships, the dwarfs have ironclads, submarines, and aircraft carriers. They hate using them because no proper dwarf would ever be happy with anything but solid earth under their feet, but they have them. They're slow to change to the point that anything less than 500 years old gets you complained at if you suggest using it, but at least some of them understand that the 20-barreled artillery piece is nice to have even if their ancestors might not approve. The second is that these dwarfs are the embodiment of the word spite. They're bitter that the other races won't just conform to proper dwarf ways. They hate orcs and goblins for ruining their once great cities. They hate
Like, everything about them is literally about holding grudges. They have the book of grudges, and they write down everything that anyone has done to wrong them.
the elves for that war they got into thousands of years ago. A war that ultimately started, mind you, because the dwarf diplomat forcibly had his beard shaved. There were some other factors leading up to it.
I mean, you don't do that, right? Like, you don't shave a dwarf's beard, brother, right?
But
Everyone
that
knows
was
that.
the final straw. The average dwarf doesn't know about the Lizardmen much, but they'd certainly hate them too if they knew the Slann were involved in shifting some mountain ranges around that destroyed a whole lot of dwarf holds. Have you ever wronged a dwarf? Into the book you go. The Great Book of Grudges, that is. Every single thing that has in some way wronged the dwarf race is put down in there. Most dwarf holds have their own personal ones for slight against them in particular. Some dwarfs have their own personal book. Even if they don't, they have photographic memory. If you've wronged them, they'll remember. It doesn't even need to be on purpose. A human town once shorted the dwarfs 2 coins by accident in exchange for some construction work. The dwarfs sent an army and killed everyone in it. If this happens to you and you try to seek some sort of retribution for this insane idea of compensation they seem to have, you're going back in the book for any harm you might cause doing it. They will spend centuries and entire military campaigns fighting wars to right grudges, and naturally anything that happens to them during these campaigns leads to more grudges, which leads to them trying to right those grudges, which causes more grudges. You know that saying about digging 2 holes when you set out for revenge?
Yo, dog, I heard you like grudges. Here's some grudges for your grudges. You got grudges.
2 holes is not nearly enough for the Dowie. And who could forget the Slayers? Let's say you're a
Slayers
dwarf,
are dope.
and you committed some seriously dishonorable action. Maybe your negligence led to other dwarfs getting killed. Maybe you fled at the height of a battle. Or maybe you just lost a bit too much money on a bet, or had your beard shaved against your will. In any of those cases, there's only one option available to you. Kill yourself. Take the Slayer Oath and die in battle. There's no redeeming yourself in any way but death. There's funerals held for those who take the Slayer Oath before they even leave to find something to kill them, because for all intents and purposes, they've died and the message just hasn't gone through to them yet. If you want some great books that explore Slayers, dwarfs, and the Warhammer world, read Gotrek and Felix. Read Gotrek and Felix anyway. Do it. Now. While the dwarfs certainly have their work cut out for them, they've got some good stuff to make them cool regardless. They can't use magic like wizards, so instead they grab it by the balls and hit it with a hammer until it works perfectly how they want it to with their runes. The longer their beards are, the more respected they are, and there's even a military unit called Longbeards. If their beard can touch the floor, they get equipped with some of the best armor dwarf money can buy. They've got the finest weapons in the setting, the finest armor in the setting, and while they may be slow as all hell, if they catch you, it's game over. If you like facial chair, hate change, and despise other people for being different, take a look at the dwarfs. Imagine dwarfs without that silly grudge ideology. You've committed a wrong and have to make up for it, but you can right it without causing your own death. And what's more, you can properly...
I don't know anything about the Chaos Dwarves other than they're just dwarves that have been corrupted by chaos, you know, hence the name.
use magic. Fireball and lightning and all those other lovely spells you can think of. Without the shackles of tradition or even their own biology holding them back, they can produce wonders of both magic and industry. Unfortunately, they replace stupid grudges with one of the most horrific slaver cultures around, and they forego tradition to worship actual demons and dark gods.
Like, is that hair or are those horns? It looks like hair that's been shaped into a horn. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't really tell.
And being able to use magic isn't necessarily a good thing, because it eventually turns them into stone statues. These are the Chaos Dwarfs, and they're horrifying in a way the more human followers of Chaos can only dream of being. Saying they take the best of the Dwarfs is sort of overstating it, because the best of the Dwarfs is their willingness to stand by both the letter and spirit of their word. They'll have your back no matter what. Plus, while their incredible stubbornness does hold them back from a lot of progress they can make and gets them into some stupid conflicts, it also means they're not only going to accomplish whatever they set out to do, but always stand by your side. If the dwarfs say they're gonna help you, they're gonna help you. And if a human, dwarf, and elf are all fighting together, the dwarf is gonna be the last one to break. The Chaos Dwarves take these traits and have molded them in a way that is best suited to being an evil bastard. The craftsmanship of the dwarves makes weapons, yes, but also architectural wonders and genuine pieces of art so good it can make a man weep. The Chaos Dwarves make hell factories that are 2,000% efficient and make the most brutal weapons Chaos has to offer. They take the runic magic of the dwarfs and use it to bind demons into their weapons and armor. The demons aren't happy with this, but the Chaos Dwarfs are still dwarfs. They're so good at what they do that more often than not, the demons are powerless once the dwarfs get their hands on them. They aren't numerous, and they aren't even terribly expansionist, but when the Chaos Dwarfs do go to war, there's nothing that can truly equal it. The finest weapons and armor just like the dwarfs, only now bolstered with the power of Hellspawn. They even have the closest thing to a nice chaos god to worship, which give them all sorts of benefits. Hashut. Sure, he's called the Father of Darkness and is the god of tyranny and is overall exactly as evil as you'd expect from that, but he doesn't screw the dwarfs over. They want power, he likes it when tyrants are in power, so in exchange for them using their dwarf talents to enslave others, he gives them power. The most
I didn't even know that they have their own chaos god that they worship. Interesting. I mean, yeah, it sounds like basically they're just dwarves that imbue all of their technology with, you know, demon powers, the warp, chaos, whatever you want to call it.
Commonly seen use of Chaos Dwarfs is as artillery crewmen for the Hell Cannon unit, as well as frequently selling Chaos Lord's weapons and armor. This is because of both their isolationist nature and because they don't really have an army. They do have legacy rules for the old world, and they have had an army, unlike Cathay, but their status as properly playable is a bit all over the place. Still though, if you don't mind legacy rules and finding either old minis or third-party ones to use, you can field the Chaos Dwarf army. So if you like the dwarfs but wish they were horrendous in every way possible, check out the Chaos Dwarfs. Just get used to people calling them chorfs. Not the most dignified nickname, that one. The ogres were the last race the old ones made for pissing off. They're resistant to chaos, tough unlike the elves, capable of changing things up quickly unlike the dwarfs, and are as ambitious and fluid as mankind. Unfortunately, the older ones couldn't quite get them to stop eating everything in sight, and never properly finished them before they left, or their homelands for that matter. When chaos invaded, the ogres were left unfinished in this state, and many became nomadic after they ate everything in whatever their first homeland was. They also ate the ancestors of the modern-day giants, who were a whole lot smarter, wiser, and powerful than the inbred alcoholic morons that giants are in Warhammer today. Things were made worse for them when they decided to migrate into Cathay, because the Dragon Emperor dropped a meteor on their homeland and blew it up. Now they had nowhere to return to, were still really hungry, and that meteor made a big hole called the Great Maw. It's a big hole in the ground with teeth, and the ogres throw food and people into it to get magical powers.
So they have their own Rancor pit. Only, you know, Warhammerized. Is it called the Rancor? I could be saying the wrong name.
They also worship a volcano and drink its lava to get fire magic.
Whatever those pit things are from Star Wars, I think I'm saying the wrong name. I think the Rancor is actually the thing that Luke killed in the little prison scene or whatever at the beginning, you know, under Jabba's palace. Anyway.
Neither of the past two sentences were made up by me. I love this setting. They're vaguely based on Mongolia, but I don't think
Sarlacc pit. I think that's what it is. Anyway.
Genghis Khan ever ate an entire city's population.
Yes,
killed everyone in it, sure, but I don't think there was mass cannibalism. The ogres, though, do exactly that. Everything about them revolves around food. Their social hierarchy is in large part determined by how fat you are. They have a race of goblinoid slaves called...
Interesting. So kind of like the orcs, the bigger they are, the more prestige they have, but instead of like big, strong, growy, you know, it's about how big, fat, much you can eat, growy.
Noblars they employ as equal parts pack mule, assistant chefs, and snacks. They go to war to eat other races' food and or the other races. One of the most common ways you'll see ogres around is as mercenaries, because while they are stupid, they're smart enough to realize being a mercenary means you can travel the world sampling all the food you can find, and you'll even get paid for the trouble. The gut is a sacred part of an ogre's body, to the point that oftentimes it's the only part of an ogre they keep protected with armor. That might sound stupid, but consider they're twice as tall, 4 times as wide, and 8 times as heavy as a normal person, and can reliably defeat demon invasions. The closest thing to an ogre's central government is Greece's Goldtooth's tribe that sets up toll booths on the trading routes between Cathay and the Old World. Aside from that, though, they can be literally anywhere. They're happy to sell their services to all races, and sometimes they can even become corrupted by chaos. Being resistant to chaos, corruption, and immune to it are different things, especially if they willingly join for one reason or another. Sometimes they even embrace the cultures of the places they go willingly. An ogre isn't exactly going to fit in an imperial noble's party, but are you going to tell the 9-foot-tall slab of muscle with a racial reputation for eating people that he's being a bit of a slob? No, you aren't. And if someone does, everyone at your fancy dinner...
These guys kind of, I'm getting like Ogren feels from these guys. These are like Ogrins, but like their own race and with the Warhammer fantasy twist, right?
Your party now has some rather gruesome entertainment, while your ogre guest has dessert.
But they're all about just like eating stuff.
The Chaos Demons are pretty similar between fantasy and 40k.
Yeah.
They're all servants/bits of a greater god. Sufficient concentrations of magic can allow them to show up, and when a wizard messes up their spell, they can manifest that way too. They want to tear down the mortal world and bring ruin to the realms of man, elf, and dwarf, all that good stuff you can expect of demons. The only real difference is how they came about. In 40k, all the Chaos Gods have birthdays. Slaanesh has the most concrete one, but the other ones at one point very much came into existence. Warped timey-wimey cop-out garbage means they've also always existed, but I don't care about that.
Yeah.
In fantasy, they have always existed, though. They're just evil gods who exist to ruin stuff. It's how it works. Chaos came about when they broke through the portals on each of the planet's poles when the old ones overused them to ferry materials and magic to their burgeoning creations. Other than that, pretty much the same, if with a small bit more emphasis on their positive aspects. Only a small bit, though. Khorne still likes war, Nurgle still likes disease, Tzeentch still likes scheming, and Slaanesh still likes degeneracy. Same demon units, same greater demons. Hell, most of the named demons are the same. Where they really shine and differentiate between settings isn't their followers. Let's get GW's least favorite child out of the way first. The Beastmen are a cross between beasts and men.
I like the Beastmen.
Being born of chaos itself, the dark god.
And I've kind of talked about this in some of the 40k videos too. I feel like the Beastmen would kind of be an interesting race. I know they're kind of like part of chaos itself in 40k, but I feel like they would be their own like interesting race in 40k, you know, like they're basically kind of like subhumans or whatever, or mutated humans. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what they would look like, you know, with like cybernetic implants and stuff like that in 40k. I don't know. Anyway.
Gods don't need to bribe them with gifts to ensure their worship. Unfortunately for them, this means the Beastmen rarely, if ever, get any gifts from the gods. They know they'll always have their worship, so they get the scraps the proper Chaos Warriors get. Given that one theory of how they came about is man and beast getting a bit too friendly with each other, I don't feel too bad for them. Don't let that fool you, though. While the nations of men consider them to be a nuisance for all but the most isolated towns, and the dwarfs view them similarly, the wood elves know the true danger.
I don't know, they're quite annoying in the game, okay? When I'm playing Empire, they're always running in and trying to mess with my settlements, okay? I find them rather annoying.
Danger they represent. In the forest of the world, millions of them lurk, and when they go to war, entire swaths of the country are trampled underneath their hooves. They defile nature with their every step, and won't stop their savage crusade until the civilized peoples of the world exist in a constant state of being hunted by their bestial overlords. At least, that's what we're told in between lore blurbs of them being butchered like the cattle they look like. For the love of God, at least the Eldar are powerful on the tabletop more often than not. The Beastmen usually suck on tabletop and in the lore. I'm trying to be a hype man for the factions here, but while I wasn't for Bretonnia because I hate them, I'm not for the Beastmen because I pity them. For what it's worth though, they are incredibly dangerous to the average person in this setting. Villages at the frontier of almost every faction are regularly under assault by Beastmen raiders, and when they gather in force, they'll be wiped off the map at a moment's notice. And since they're all part animal, they have incredibly sharp senses. If you get in a fight with one while you're traveling, it's already game over. You can probably take that one on, but the 20 or so more beelining
they're going to be right there with it.
Because they heard a fight is a different story. The Beastmen are a savage race to the point that things like intact walls drive them to frothing rage, such as their hatred for civilization. All they do in their free time is get into brutal fights amongst each other, sometimes involving one challenging another for a position in the hierarchy, but usually just to assert dominance or for fun, hunt people, and drink. They do have some forms of worship for the Chaos Gods, and their shamans both help construct effigies and are actually revered by other beastmen as something above their common squabbling, but for the most part, they're every stereotype of barbarians squashed into one. Aside from those shamans, they have no desire to form their own culture, civilization, or cities. They just want to hunt like the beasts they are. The beastmen may be a bit of an acquired taste, but for what it's worth, I don't think I've ever seen people address beastmen players with anything but some measure of respect. While the beasts of chaos are no more, the OG beastmen of fantasy have returned to the tabletop. If you like the idea of being this savage force of nature that just wants to ruin, all the while being backed by the dark gods, the Beastmen might be for you. Just, don't expect to win all that often. Part of the respect Beastmen players get is for sticking with an army that Games Workshop seems to hold in utter contempt. I know I'm incredibly biased, but I do not care for the motivations of most of the traitor legions. They strike me as like listening to a story about me and my siblings not getting along when we were kids, which I'm sure is at least partly intentional.
I do kind of agree with that in 40k, right? Like, most of the traitor legions just feel like they have daddy issues. That's essentially what it kind of comes down to. Like, the Primarchs, you know, a lot of them that turn seem like they were jealous of someone else, or they felt like they should have been the War Master, or blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, they were fed lies about the Emperor, and yeah, they just seem like they kind of have more daddy issues than anything else. Especially Conrad, although he never really turned to chaos.
Intentional, but that's not the kind of motivation I...
But then again, you know, can you kind of really blame him? Like, when you have a dream your entire life about your death, and it's because your father sends assassins to kill you, and that's the only real context you have, you can kind of understand why you would have daddy issues at that point. I'm just saying.
Want for why someone sold their soul to the forces of hell, at least not on a faction-wide level. By contrast, let's look at the Warriors of Chaos motivations for worshipping chaos. I'd say there's two blanket ones you can say. The reasonable one is that they live in the barren, icy lands of Norska. Aside from the southernmost regions, permafrost covers the whole land. No crops can be grown, and
Chaos
few
Vikings, essentially.
Hunt. Because of their proximity to the North Pole, where the realm of chaos intersects with reality,
they don't have much of a choice.
Those animals are heavily mutated, if not outright demonic. A lot of these people are also almost explicitly forsaken by Sigmar, as a lot of the ones who live there now are the descendants of the ones Sigmar forced out when he was forming the Empire. With all that in mind, I think it's at least understandable that these people would turn to the Chaos Gods for protection and worship. If the only option of worship is the guy who's all about plague, you might as well hope he's in a good mood and will keep the plague at bay in exchange for a few sacrificed southerners. The other motivation, while less relatable, is also much more fun. Just wanting to be an evil, powerful overlord. Why do you worship the Dark Gods? Because they give you ultra-powerful cursed armor you can use to give them more sacrifices to gain more power with. Why do you slaughter in the name of the Blood God and all the others? Because it's fun. Who gives a damn about morality? That orphanage made the mistake of being in front of you, so it obviously had to go. If the Blood Dragons are a heavy metal album cover, the Warriors of Chaos are every heavy metal album cover combined into one. Kill for the Dark Gods at every possible moment. Let loose your darkest desires onto the world, because you have the explicit backing of the powers that be to do so. The Norskins who live in the frozen north will make pilgrimages to the northern pole and realm of chaos to become true warriors of darkness. If they're unlucky or unworthy, they'll turn into chaos spawn or demon food. If they're lucky or worthy enough, they'll become mighty chaos lords. And if they're really lucky and get just the right amount of attention from their gods, they can become demon princes of chaos, immortal beings with the blessings of the gods themselves to pillage across the world in their name. Look at this dude. He has 4 weapons visible alone, and his armor looks like he just grabbed every single bit of scrap metal around and had a demon turn it into something almost coherent to look at. If you want to play the bad guys who revel in being bad guys for the sake of it, the Warriors of Chaos have no equal. But believe it or not, these guys aren't the evilest faction. I love the Skaven. Take a rat, make it person-sized, walk on 2 legs, and fill it with hate. Now let them outnumber everyone else combined by a factor of 10, give them energy weapons and the foulest of magics, and a desire to see everyone else brought low before them. With that, you have the Skaven. And
this is another race that I'm surprised isn't in the 40k universe in some shape or form, right? Like, with how popular the Skaven are in fantasy, I could see them translating in some form to 40k, you know? But I guess the question is, like, there's already so many, like, horde factions, like the Tyrannid, and yeah, there's just factions that already kind of fit that role in 40k lore, etc. You know, what kind of place really would they have? You know, like the Necrons already have, like, crazy old world technology. The Tyranids are like a horde race that go out and consume everything, kind of like the Skavens do, etc. So yeah, I don't know, but it would be interesting to see, like, again, what the Skavens would look like in a 40k setting.
And they are truly glorious. Unlike the Chaos Gods, their god of the Horned Rat has absolutely no positives. His own little territory in the realm of Chaos is the realm of Ruin. It sucks, and in there is a greater demon of his for every single Skaven, all of whom also suck. With numbers and power like they have, there's only one reason the Skaven haven't already taken over the world. The thing their god and race embodies more than anything else is the word asshole. They hate the other races for sure. They're petty and spiteful enough that even though they don't have any uses for gold, they mine it solely because it inconveniences everyone else. But they hate each other only a fraction of a fraction less than they hate everyone else.
Right.
They're also all power-hungry morons who are convinced that if they were in charge, they could lead Skavendom to victory. And of course, themselves to a life of luxury and power. So one will have a plan to defeat a dwarf army, and then all his underlings immediately begin sabotaging each other to look good for the commander, sabotaging the commander to take his place, and then sabotaging themselves because they're just stupid. They eat each other for food, the Skaven at the top bully the ones below them, and this lovely form of Reaganomics trickles all the way down to the common clan rat bullying Skaven slaves because the rat above him bullied him because the rat above him bullied him. Of course, none of this matters in terms of defeating them. For one, they're rat people. There's a reason the only human-inhabited place on Earth that doesn't have rats is Alberta. The Skaven literally breed like rats because they are. In the time it takes you to kill one, they've already given birth to another 1,000. In a chapter from a Skaven character's point of view, the commanding wizard of the Skaven army remarked it was impressive how they managed to pull off a victory despite only outnumbering the enemy 4-1. When a 4-1 ratio is what they consider to be a pretty even fight, you can rest easy, knowing there's a lot of rats under your feet. Or don't rest easy. I wouldn't. And of course their technology. It's the best in the world. They have nuclear weapons.
Right.
They burrow under the ground and put them under people or places they don't like, which is everywhere and everyone.
Yeah.
The only places the Skaven don't have some presence on is Ulthuan, the High Elf home, and Athelloren, the Wood Elf home. They can't get to Ulthuan because it's a floating island continent that doesn't touch the sea floor. There's no ground for them to dig up under through. They can't get to Athelloren, meanwhile, because the ground itself is alive and actively hates them for trespassing. They'll send thousands of their slaves and basic soldiers to death in order to slightly soften up the enemy defenses. As far as the Council of 13 that rules Skavendom is concerned, 1,000 slave rats in exchange for the enemy losing a couple rockets and cannonballs is a positive trade. This is before they start firing at you with magically powered Gatling guns, throwing poison gas at you, and lighting you on fire with magically powered flamethrowers. Every single one of those things has the potential to break and kill the operators because the magic rocks powering it are incredibly unstable, and it just doesn't matter to the Skaven. Other Skaven killed are other potential rivals killed, and everyone else they kill is one less obstacle to Skaven domination over the world. That magical substance they use to power their weapons is a rock called Warpstone, by the way, and the Skaven covet it above all else. They use it to power pretty much everything that isn't manually powered by treadmills of slave rats. Other uses for it include using it to boost their magical strength, boost their physical strength, as food, and as a cocaine equivalent. Everyone else that touches the stuff either mutates or dies on the spot, and for the Skaven it's nose candy. If they sound goofy, it's because they are, but consider what it's like on the other side of a Skaven invasion. You're walking down the street, things have been a bit rough with the goings on in the town, but nothing that can't be explained by natural causes. Then all you hear is explosions, the sounds of the most horrifying mutated monstrosities ever conceived, and right as you turn the corner, all you see is dozens of beady red eyes staring at you with full intent to kill and eat you. And that's if you're lucky. On the other end of things, the Skaven are horrifying. There's a lot more about the Skaven I could say, but here's a quick and easy way to know if you like them. If you despise everything about everyone around you, know for a fact you should be in charge of everyone because you're clearly right, and altruism makes you want to curl up and die, you'll like the Skaven. Or alternatively, if you want to rock up to a fantasy setting with machine guns, magical artillery, and nuclear bombs, they're for you too. And I believe that is every major fantasy faction, and a lot of the minor ones. If you're new to fantasy, I hope this was a decently informative primer. If you aren't, I hope something in here was funny. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the Warhammer fantasy to my Warhammer, the backbone of everything that has come before and since. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there.
Alright. There we go. There we go. That was every Warhammer fantasy faction explained by Pancreas Network. Links, as always, will be down below in the description to his original video without my commentary and reaction, and to his channel. So please do me a favor, if you enjoyed this video of his, be sure to go over there and hit that like button on the video and check out his channel. He's got a lot of great content for fantasy universes of Warhammer 40k and others, so check out his stuff. If you enjoy his content, hit that sub button on his channel, show the man some love. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the factions I knew pretty much about anyway, just from playing the Total War Warhammer games. I guess I would like to learn a little bit more in depth about, you know, some more of their lore and history and stuff like that. So I guess I kind of like need to probably look at like specific videos he and other content creators have about the specific factions and some of the lore and heroes and tales and things that they've done. Because again, for the most part, I knew most of the stuff on this video, so just from playing Total War, you know, the Total War games. But it's always fun to go through and learn about the things that you didn't, you know. Like I really had no knowledge of the Ogrins. And like I said with the Cathay, it's interesting that they've never been a tabletop thing. And you know, again, I wonder if it's something where, are they ever going to be? Will Games Workshop ever actually commit to making them in the tabletop? Or are they afraid, you know, that it's going to take away from Age of Sigmar? Because I kind of feel like that's where their standpoint is, right? I feel like they're kind of really trying to mostly promote Age of Sigmar over the old world stuff, and they're kind of just re-releasing the old world stuff because that's what a lot of the community wanted. You know, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, great video. Like I said, I think my top 5 factions, at least for the Total War Warhammer games: Empire's number 1, High Elves number 2, Kislev and Cathay are kind of interchangeable between the number 3 and number 4 spots, and then probably the Tomb Kings at number 5. I think I need to play the Skavens a little bit more, probably, just because, again, like, who doesn't like nukes and rattling guns and things like that? I like the Dwarves as well because of their heavy artillery. I wish, the one thing that I really wish about in the Total War games is that they actually had naval combat. It's something that I was always disappointed in. I would just like to see, you know, more naval stuff, which, if the rumors are true, that their next big thing that they're working on is a 40k Total War game. I don't know how they're going to really have it without having, you know, naval space, you know, battles. You know what I'm saying? Like, I guess they could just continue doing it as they do, or like it's ships and they just fight and you kind of like auto you know, resolve the battle, but I feel like the space battles are such kind of like an integral thing in the 40K universe and lore that they've got to bring naval combat back if they do a 40K, you know, Total War game. Tried to throw some of those facts. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sound like me. So, I mean, yeah, great video by Pancreas No Work. We're definitely going to check out some more, getting some more stuff in fantasy. I'm also going to be expanding and doing some reactions to some Lord of the Rings stuff, some Dark Souls stuff, etc., etc. We're going to be expanding into some more universes, looking at some other analog horror stuff as well. You know, there's been news that I guess A24 Studios has picked up Kane Pixel's Backrooms movie. So looking forward to whenever that's actually going to happen. And I guess I'll have to watch that new review for it. I don't know if I'll be able to do like an actual reaction to that, because it's a video, you know, an actual movie. And then the big one that I've been waiting for a while is Greylock, which I guess there's news that they've begun work on the next Greylock episode, which the last one was released almost a year ago now, I believe. And it left off on a big kind of note, you know, like the I think it was episode 12 of Greylock was pretty dope. So, and of course, there's still plenty of stuff to check out in the SCP universe. We still need to finish up Red Tape, etc., etc. So, still lots of content. I also plan on doing some more of my own original content with stuff with gaming, getting into the 40K books, doing chapter and book reviews and doing videos for that, etc., etc. So still got a lot of stuff that we're going to be doing here on the channel. So yeah, if you like this video and if any of that stuff that I've talked about sounds interesting, be sure, you know, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and the channel grow, and it lets the YouTube algorithm gods know that you enjoy this kind of content and you want to see some more. If you'd like to join us, as I am doing my, you know, reaction live right now with my YouTube members, love to have you guys come in, hang out, and you know, join our discussions that we have before, during, and after the videos. And yeah, if you guys are still watching here to the very end, I greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch the video all the way through. And I hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day, and we'll see you guys on the next one.